And Jeff, if you've got the language to read, I'd appreciate if you could do that for us.
Okay. Just a second. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Strand. I'm the CLIC chair and of the Capital Long Range Improvements Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to note that the meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. The task force chair will call the meeting to order and will ask the clerk to call the roll, which we're going to, I thought, waive because we verified presence of a quorum. John?
Thank you. Yeah, so on advice of city staff, we're going to waive the roll call. So let's just dive into our business. We have a motion that was tabled last week that was consideration for the classification of BR 135, which was not showing up last week in the CVRs. It is now there, so hopefully people have had a chance to take a look at that. I don't think we need to go through the formality of untabling this. I'll just entertain a motion for a project priority ranking and a contribution to city goals ranking for BR 135.
John, I don't have the spreadsheet up. Can you clarify which one that is?
Yeah, that's the bridge over Pillsbury Avenue at, I think it's 28th Street.
Got it.
Looking for a motion on this one. If people are reading it, to take a minute, that's fine. Going over you, if you could mute when you're not talking, that'd be helpful. Steve, can you hear me? Thank you. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, since the silence, how about moving it as significant moderate?
The motion on the floor is for significant and moderate for BR 135. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, the motion is been seconded. Is there any discussion on significant and moderate for this one? Since nobody's speaking, I'll jump in on this one. I don't have strong feelings about this, but I'm having trouble picturing that road. But my sense, I saw the car count's 5,200. My sense is that's not a. I wonder whether this should be important versus significant, I guess is my bottom line under project priority. And again, I'm not super wedded to that. It's just a thought on this one.
John, that was my initial reaction, but I wondered, is this the bridge that would serve Carmel? I can't remember if that's Pillsbury or Pleasant, but that gets a lot of traffic for the shops in there if it's the right street. But I'm not exactly sure.
Steve, it is.
Okay, so that would be a traffic generator. I would bump it up a little bit beyond a typical residential street in my mind. But
the other observation I'd make on this one is that it's a replacement. So if this gets slowed down a little bit, it's not like it's going from renovation to replacement. It's already at replacement. Anybody else have any feelings on this one? I don't feel strongly enough to make an amendment to the motion unless I hear, a lot of consensus around that.
When's it scheduled?
Oh, that I don't. I want to say either 24 or 25. Let me look quick.
And the only thing I'd add is that I believe this is near where the Kmart redevelopment is going to occur, in which case you'd expect additional traffic in that area as that gets redeveloped.
So I misstated. It's not over 28th. It's over the Midtown Greenway, and it is scheduled for 24. And there's a big, I hate this new CBR system we have, but there's a 4.1 million in federal grants in 2024. Wow. So we do need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I guess for that, oh, sorry, Erica's got her hand raised.
Go ahead, Erica.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I'm not remembering how the other bridges over the Greenway got rated. To me, it's pretty much just the same. They're basically all the same age and of the same kind of poor condition. So not remembering what the other ones were, this is not helpful. But I mean, there's, to me, is a little also reminiscent of like all the complaints about the Nicollet Ave Bridge over the Parkway, over Minnehaha Parkway. Like if you are underneath those bridges on the regular, shit's falling down, you know, and they really do all need to be replaced. So I don't think that's enough for me to change it, not remembering how the other ones got rated, but I feel like kind of however we rate it, it's gonna happen. So
that's a fair point, and I you know, I don't recall anything in the CBR about the as you put it, shit falling down, but that's exactly it. Some of these bridges have that problem more than others, but if that is a problem, if anybody knows if that's a problem on this one, then I think I'm good with significant based on that alone. Katie, did you have something you want to say?
No, I'm good.
All right, well, any other comments on this? Hearing none.
Well, John, I'll just throw in that, you know, even if I think there are 41 bridges in this sector, and there's a lot of study work that's been done. But even as people have been on Click before or a long time, remember, wasn't it Fremont Avenue Bridge? We were going to replace it, then we were going to decommission it, and then now it's already it's replaced. But even a decommissioning is $1 million plus. But I think it is something, as a person who lives in Camden, where your options to cross the railroad tracks are, you know, Osseo Road, Humboldt, and I'm talking about any place that you can get across without being stopped. It's like one choice. So having 41 choices at $5 million a pop, you know, we're all in it together, one Minneapolis, but, you know, in terms of the overall cost to the taxpayers, these are very large costs over a long time. But I support it.
Jeff, on that point, let me add a historical note. This was originally an at-grade rail line, and back about 105 or so years ago, the city requested that the railroad put the trench in because of that issue of rail crossings. And so that's why we have 40 some bridges. We could certainly argue about whether they could have done the job with 20, but that's what we have.
Anything further on this? Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm sorry, I'm half facetious. So then the North Side Trench request will be forthcoming? No, I'm just kidding.
So moved.
All right, I sense we've come to the end of comments on this one, so let's take a vote. The motion is for significant and strong for BR 135. Neil, can you call the roll on this?
All right, let's see. John Bernstein.
Aye.
Steve Brandt.
Aye.
Sonia DeGarmo.
Aye.
Scott Engel. Amity Foster.
Aye.
Aye, Goodnestead. Hustad.
Aye.
Lee Jones.
Aye.
Matt Kazinka. Sorry, was there a Matt Kazinka? Erica Mauter,
Aye.
Ann Miller,
Aye.
George Montague,
Aye.
Todd Schumann. Todd Schumann. Chair Jeff Strand.
Aye.
And there's 10 ayes.
All right, the motion carries. That completes all of our ratings. I did promise, because this went so quickly last week, that if anybody wanted to revisit anything that we did last week, with a 2/3 vote, we can reopen something that's already been passed. Are there any, does anybody have any motions along those lines? Second call for any reconsideration. Last call for any reconsideration. Okay, so that concludes all of our official business. Let me just talk quickly about the next few meetings. The next 3 Wednesday meetings that we have are for this task force, and our more than our single work for this next 3 weeks is to deal with comments. So what we will do as a group is, individually and as a group, is draft comments about any transportation project that you would like to draft a comment about. I guess we should try to use SharePoint to do that. I need to think about this. In past years, we've had a secretary whose sole job has been to consolidate comments. It's not about taking minutes. To the extent that's happening, city staff will take care of that. So this is not a job that has a ton of responsibility. And I need to figure out between now and next Wednesday how much we're going to pass around comments via email. We're not going to actually do any voting via email. Pass around comments via email versus using SharePoint, and whether or not we actually need a secretary. But if people could start thinking about that, if I figure out that we do need a secretary, I'm going to ask for a volunteer at the start of our meeting this coming Wednesday on the 5th. My request to you would be that however we figure out to do this going forward, whether it's email or SharePoint, the more you can do in advance, the more efficient it'll make our work. Having said that, I know we're all busy, and I know that sometimes an idea pops into your head later rather than sooner. So don't pass on making a comment if it comes to you later. I don't ever want to cut off this process, but at the same time, to the extent that you can, the more work we can do in advance, the more quickly we can get our work done. And just for the new people, a couple other things on this. We are all free to comment on any project we want. Just because you sit on the Transportation Task Force does not mean you can't comment on an HD project. You just have to forward that on to the HD task, somebody on the HD Task Force, probably Eric, or in SharePoint. And the 2 task forces will vote independently on their respective comments that then will go before the full committee. Nothing actually makes it into the full report until it passes a vote at the full committee. So, but typically, unless it's a really controversial comment, things go fairly smoothly through the full committee. Not always, but typically. And there is still another opportunity to add comments at the when we're meeting as a full committee. I wouldn't say it's discouraged, but it's sort of the same sentiment that I just expressed. We're trying to be efficient and get stuff done. So to the extent it's something that can be introduced now that you're aware of, you should do that. If you think of a transportation or an HD comment after these task forces are done meeting, while we're still considering it at the full committee level, you should introduce it then. And there'll be some that won't come up till then because they'll be around funding decisions that we haven't made yet. So with that's sort of the preview of how this is going to go over the next 3 weeks. Are there any concerns or questions that anybody would like to raise?
John, I have several questions. So Wednesday is the deadline for, at least initially, for comments, right?
Yeah, well, ideally, let's make it a day or two before.
Okay.
So that people, I'd like to see something get circulated in advance of that meeting, so we're not taking up a lot of time in the meeting to read comments. So if you've got a comment to write, if you can get it But Neil, is the SharePoint set up where people can directly share comments to that?
That's a great question. I am not sure on that, and I can get back to you before. I don't know if it makes sense to, we can check on that, and then you can send out an email to everyone directing them which way for the comments.
Also, is SharePoint accessible for the public, or is that just for Click?
I think only you can get into it right now. I think you have to be invited to be into the SharePoint.
Because to the extent possible, I think that comments that are in process that haven't been voted on yet, it's probably better that those are not publicized any more than they have to be. The reality is these task force meetings are now public, so people can hear the process. But if that's it's up to us to do this. We can certainly take input from the public, but if that's a place where the public can comment, I don't think we want to be sharing there. I think we want to circulate it by email. I'll get that figured out with city staff and send it. Me or somebody on the city staff will send an email to this task force letting you know where to submit comments. And ideally, if you can do that, let's say by noon on Tuesday, so that something can be compiled that people can take a look at before the meeting. And I'm as guilty as anybody. It's a task that falls to the bottom of the list, and suddenly it's 11:55 on Wednesday and you haven't read the comments yet. So if you can try to make the effort to read them in advance, it will speed things up for us. I find that as time-consuming as these 2 days of presentations have been, now is when the crunch hits. The amount of work that we have to get through by the end of June is quite a bit. And so to the extent we can be as efficient as possible in these meetings, that will help.
Neil, could you also include the email or whatever you want us to use in SharePoint for HD?
Sure.
And John, my other question was, in some years, I realized I've been so focused on new issues that have come up and drafting new comments that I've sort of forgotten previous year's comments that are worth repeating. Are you going to go through transportation comments from last year to sort of see what's still relevant, to see if we want to, put it up for a vote to put it in again this year, or how do you want to handle that?
I do that every year, and I'm pretty certain that Jeff does the same, and everybody's welcome to do that. Go back and look at last year and even the year before and read the comments that were written both in general HD and transportation. And to the extent that you see something that hasn't been responded to, where we need to toughen up the language a little bit to get a response or whatever it is, or just simply repeat the comment, absolutely. But I do that, and I'm quite sure Jeff does as well, but everybody's welcome to take a look and put in their 2 cents. I see a question. Amelia's got her hand up. So let me recognize her, and we'll come back to you if you've got more, Steve.
Thanks, John. I just got some answers from Justin, who's our expert on the SharePoint site. So I just wanted to share. The public does not have access to the SharePoint site. That's just by invite only. And he believes everyone should be able to upload documents there. So if you want to work sort of the pre-sharing of comments through the SharePoint site, that should be an option.
Okay. And do you know whether there's a discrete way to do that for HD and transportation?
I mean, I think we probably could set up some folders, but let me get back to my expert and see if there's a better solution. Oh, go ahead, Neil.
There are currently 2 folders in there, divided up between Human Development and Transportation Task Force. So I think you could just go in there and have comments. And it looks like there's already like a draft set up in there from last year.
So that's perfect. So that should address Steve's question about, and for anybody else that has a comment they'd like to make to HD, you can put it right in their folder. So if people could get stuff in there by noon on Tuesday, I'm thinking that possibly for convenience purposes, I'll talk to Justin about this. Amelia, if you can talk to him right now, one of us maybe will send around an email with all of those compiled into a single document that people can read in advance of the meeting to encourage that to occur.
Yeah, I think there's some capabilities in SharePoint where we can alert folks when things have been updated so they know when to look. But I'll talk with him about good suggestions and we'll circle back with you.
That would be great. So just keep noon Tuesday, this coming Tuesday in mind. if you want to make sure that you have a comment that gets in time for everyone to review in advance of the meeting, that's the cutoff to make it. Anything else? Steve, I don't know if you had anything else. I didn't want to cut you off. Sonia's got her hand up. Go ahead, Sonia.
As a first-time member, I'm wondering about the scope of comments and what's appropriate to comment on and what isn't. There was something that came up earlier today regarding comments made that are more appropriate to take to city council or elected officials versus in this format, in this forum. So can you give me and anybody else that's new some guidelines for the types of comments to make?
Sure. Steve, do you mind muting for a minute? The background where you are is kind of grabbing the mic. I'll make some comments about this, and then I'm going to let Jeff speak as well, because he's been around for a long time. Yeah, so today, in a couple of situations, I think it got completely off of capital improvement and got onto policy stuff, and that's what we want to avoid. That's not appropriate in the CLIC report. But to the extent that policy influences what the decisions we're trying to make, that's where it's appropriate to comment on the need for them to do something, not necessarily what they should do. And that's how I would categorize the comment we made last year about we don't want to commit millions and millions of dollars to a new police department building until you guys figure out what the future of public safety and policing is going to be in the city of Minneapolis. We didn't comment on what that should be, just the fact that they need to come to a conclusion about that before we start investing a bunch of money in it. So I think that's probably a pretty good example of where that line is. I don't know if that helps. And I would also say, comments have come up where, they've been voted down because it's been considered to be outside of our purview. So you can always take a shot at it. Jeff, I assume you're going to talk on the same subject, so let me recognize you, and then I'll come back to you, Steve.
Yeah, I generally concur with John, and I would suggest new members, take a look at the 2020 CLIC report, take a look at the comments, both from the Transportation HD and the CLIC full body. Even though everything goes through the full body, we do delineate those comments as more specific to Transportation Task Force, HD, and then sort of CLIC citywide, bigger picture. And I would just add that CLIC has over the years led the way on some, so it's kind of a fine line between policy and maybe making recommendations on programs. So I think the MPD comment from 2020 was thought through pretty carefully, and it was debated at length. Like stormwater management, because of the increased, we're dealing with stormwater flooding issues, what was it, 1997? So, issues have been around and percolating, pardon the pun, for decades.
Thanks, Jeff. Go ahead, Steve.
This is off the discussion, but it's a matter that's been bugging me, just of how to use Teams, which I share your disdain for. In the other one we all use, Zoom, you can direct a comment. Like, for example, if I had a comment directly to Erica, I could somehow direct it to her in the chat. I'm not finding a way to do that in Teams, and I just want to make sure that it's not there before I write it off.
Well, I don't know the specific answer to that, but I would point out that we're really not supposed to be using the chat in public meetings. And probably even worse to be doing a private chat than even a chat that all of the members, because the public can't see it at all. And if you do one to a single individual, then the rest of the committee can't see it. So since this is an official meeting that's being recorded, I would discourage anybody from using the chat.
Although there are times when you're having basically a technical issue, it would be nice to communicate with staff without putting it before everybody so that you're taking up the committee's time.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I don't know if there's a way to do that, but I haven't been able to. I share your frustrations with teams, and I think you're not alone. So to the extent you got a technical issue that you got to chat with them about, I think I wouldn't worry about the fact that other people have to see it. In fact, oftentimes I think when there's a technical issue, you're not the only one.
Yeah, Steve, I'm unaware of any functionality like that, so I think we might just be stuck with what we have.
I'm sure if we asked Microsoft, they'd say it's coming. Anything else anybody wants to ask or share? Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I'll just share that looking out on the SharePoint, I see the comments draft from August 2020. So rather than, do you want 13 separate Word documents uploaded, or do we just create a template and then check it out, check it in? I think multiple people can work at the same time, I hope, like a Google Doc, or if not, that'll be troublesome.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't used SharePoint before. I mean, my thought is it's going to be more efficient if we can use one document. I hope that my only concern with that is if somebody who's a little less tech savvy can somehow accidentally delete somebody else's comment. Go ahead, Amelia.
Having been that non-tech savvy person before, I would recommend, although it is a lot of documents, but if you want to do this sort of pre-screening before we compile things, I would recommend everyone upload their own document, just because it is so easy to, not check something out or not check it in quite right. Just my own experience with SharePoint, I think the simplest way is for everybody to upload their own document.
All right. I think so. Let's take that under advisement and do it that way. And then on Tuesday, we'll do some kind of a consolidated document for people that'll be for the purposes of reading, not editing, in advance of our meeting. Anything else from anybody? Well, with that, I think I'd like to declare a weather emergency. It's Friday, it's afternoon, and it's beautiful outside. That's enough reasons for me to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I'm going to take this one as unanimous consent. Is there anything we need to read to conclude the meeting, Jeff?
You're muted, Jeff.
No, John, you just say, if not and without objection, John has declared this meeting adjourned at the conclusion of this task force breakout room. The next meeting will be Wednesday, May 5th at 12 noon. And that's it.
All right, I'm going to allow you to speak for me. So with that, we are adjourned. Enjoy the weekend, everybody.
See you next week.
Okay.